Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Exorcist Believer, starring Leslie Odom Jr., Jennifer Nettles, Ann Dowd, Olivia O'Neill, Lydia Jewett, Linda Blair, and Ellen Burstyn, directed by David Gordon Green. Now, before I get into this, why did I bring up Linda Blair? Well, she has a cameo at the end, which I'm going to spoil it at this point, but let me just, before I get into the movie, just say that she doesn't look like the way that I remembered seeing her in person, but that's a whole nother story. And David Gordon Green, the director, after the Halloween trilogy that he just finished off last year, I'm a little nervous about this one. So let's see how this movie goes. We open the movie with a couple of dogs fighting with each other briefly while in Haiti, and we get photographs taken by Victor Fielding, played by Leslie Odom Jr., along with his pregnant wife Seren, who gets a blessing for protection for their baby, thanks to a little boy who knows she's pregnant. And how could he tell, which seems a bit too rude, I'll say, to ask such a thing like that. And they go into church, and she goes back to the hotel until she gets killed by an earthquake in a collapsing hotel that guy brought up just a second ago, which unfortunately ends up killing her while he saves the baby. And this opener feels super weird that I didn't know why, other than to hear and see how Seren dies, which the movie could have been better without that scene. Or maybe they could just, like, I don't know, just not tell about it. And then we'll just show it later in the movie or something. I don't really know. But in my opinion, probably the weirdest choice ever. 13 years later, in a small town called Percy, Georgia, Victor is an overprotective father to Angela, played by Lydia Jewett, and she wears the scarf her mother wore at one point in the movie, and we meet a neighbor whom I didn't realize was going to be in the whole movie, named Anne, played by Ann Dowd, telling Victor to put the trash cans away after dropping off Angela at school, he goes to the gym for a workout, while she lies to Victor about going to a friend's house with her best friend Catherine, played by newcomer Olivia O'Neill. And she lies to her parents about going to one of her friend's place to study and do homework at her friend's house. But after school, they go in the forest to talk with Angela's mother, Seren, while Victor is working at a place where he takes family photos and gets home because he says to Angela to be home by no later than dinner time. And she's not there. Surprise! And Victor calls Catherine's mom and dad Miranda, played by Jennifer Nettles, and Tony. And to be honest, I don't really like these characters, and the way the movie is shot is dreadful. They look for Angela and Catherine, and while they do so, they call the cops, who will be there soon, and Victor finds Angela's shoe and gets startled by a snake, which did give me a jump while I'm watching this in IMAX on my first viewing. And Miranda and Tony find something of Catherine's, and Detective Koenig talks with them while Victor is calm about it, and Tony and Miranda act hysterical about it, which is normal for parents to be worried about homeless people raping them as kids. But to be fair, David Gordon Green, who's the director of this as well as the Halloween trilogy that I just brought up, that was part of the reason why I was nervous about this. Is this the best you can do? Victor asks homeless people if they've seen Angela or Catherine, and now one jumps to conclusions about kids not wanting to be told what to do and uses a hot dog as a dildo. And I thought, really, with that? Come on, don't do that bullshit with me. I know you made a couple of stoner comedies, but give me a fucking break. Victor comes home with his gym partner and neighbor Stuart and brings his friend Dr. Beehive, not Hive with the V, but Beehive with the B, to pray for Angela's return and talk with Victor. And as a couple of farmers find Angela and Catherine in their barn 3 days after their disappearance. And Victor drives like a crazy motherfucker, but the miracle didn't really work for me as far as I'm concerned. Catherine and Angela get to the hospital, and Detective Conan asks for her how long they've been gone for, and she says 3 hours, Angela, I mean, when they say, as well as the movie says, is they've been gone for, and in the trailers, that they've been gone for 3 days. And some people take the pictures of the scars of Angela and Catherine and do some tests on them, and to see if anything was damaged. And they're clean, and they both ask, can they go home now? And their neighbor Anne works at the hospital they're at, and Angela hears a baby cry and slams on the window to shut it up. And the hospital scenes are acted horribly, and the acting in this thing is horrible as well, as these scenes don't make the movie add up for me. Angela tells Victor she wanted to see her mom again, and at the end of that scene, Angela asks Victor rather violently to leave her alone when he brushes his teeth, and the electrical situation in this town is not scary. It needs to pay some of their bills, I feel like. I don't know, that's just probably me overthinking this, but this movie is not scary, but somebody needs to keep an eye on it. And that was bothering me right out the bat, while the movie is not that scary at all. The next day comes, and Victor gives Angela breakfast in bed like the Rocky Road, which is something I'm not too familiar with as far as breakfast goes. And he sees Angela wet the bed, and he tried to put her in the bathtub, and she gets out of it and almost kills her dad and with her scarf, and he takes her back to the hospital. While in church, Catherine violently bursts out by saying the body and the blood, which is a scene in the trailer. And that's when she gets back into the hospital. And so far, this movie is crap. Like, what the fuck was director David Gordon Green thinking of doing another Exorcist movie with Blumhouse? While they're coming out with another movie I'm going to review that's coming out by the end of the month called Five Nights at Freddy's. And if that turns out like crap, like this movie is, I'll probably pull off a surprise in the show if both Blumhouse movies fail as far as my opinion is concerned. Victor, Miranda, and Tony are led to believe Angela and Catherine are possessed by the devil as nighttime comes, and Anne tries to take Angela's temperature, and Angela brings up St. Mary as well as Anne's baby while she was a nun, as she was pregnant with a baby and chose to not keep it, which will get brought up a couple of minutes later, while Anne introduces Victor to the author of a book she read in college, which happens to be written by Chris O'Neill, returned by Ellen Burstyn. And Victor reads the book, and he sees her interviews from the past 50 years. As he goes to her house for a visit, and he asks her for help from Chris about Angela and Catherine, and Anne hires a priest for an exorcism named Father Maddox, and the score, with an exception of the theme song, is not very noticeable, as it doesn't help me like the movie either, which is completely unfortunate. Victor brings Chris to Anne and Father Maddox and show Angela while Catherine is at home, and Chris doesn't believe that it is a good idea, and they go to Tony and Miranda's house to get Catherine out of there. And they get Catherine's brother and sister out of the house while Chris encounters Catherine. And Catherine pokes Chris in the eyeballs with a cross. And I thought, shit! They took a dump on the original movie, pushing Ellen Burstyn out of the rest of this fucking movie. And that pissed me off. And again, is this the best David Gordon Green can do, as that's a bullshit thing to do for a sequel? Victor visits Chris at the hospital and calls Stuart to get Dr. G.B.M.H into the exorcism, as she, along with Victor, Anne, Tony, Miranda, and Stuart, along with the reluctant Father Maddox, because the church won't approve of the exorcism, as they bring Angela and Catherine into the house. But Father Maddox gives Anne the book of the exorcism to Anne, and to not get too close to them while performing the exorcism, which is typical, but a little too convenient. They go inside without Father Maddox, and they're listening to the beating hearts when the exorcism begins, and Anne is doing pretty damn well with the exorcism, and of course, they're doing all the house shaking around, which is a cliche, and there is a reason I don't watch movies about exorcism anymore, as they just all feel the fucking same. Dr. G.B.M.H pours heavenly water with vinegar, and Catherine tries to beg her parents not to kill her, and Victor throws the devilish water in the sewer and tells Father Maddox the fight is in there, and the two girls, while possessed by the devil, burn the cross, while Angela and says Victor never wanted her, and I almost thought he was going to touch her. Well, I'm like, don't touch them, as the two demons tell them to choose one girl to live or one to die, I'm sorry. As Father Maddox comes in and gets his neck snapped and killed rather quickly, and Victor gets the mother's scarf and puts it on Angela and chooses Angela rather pretty quickly, and Angela goes back to normal while Catherine dies. And I thought, don't you fucking dare make a sequel, as there won't be as they were planning on one in about a year and a half from now. But don't even think about doing what I'm thinking, where Tony and Miranda hate on Angela and Victor, because that's a bullshit way to make a sequel to an ending that was bullshit to begin with. And Chris gets a surprise visitor with a surprise cameo by her daughter Reagan, returned briefly by Linda Blair. Very brief, which is a nice cameo, but I could tell it was Linda Blair because, remember, I said in the first movie that I met Linda Blair over the summer and got her autograph on my Blu-ray of The Exorcist, aka the original movie, as the climax was bullshit and it pissed me off, as this was a terrible idea to do a sequel to The Exorcist, which is a classic for many, many reasons, as it was one terrible movie after another, and this series which really disappointed me. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 3.2 out of 10. This is the series director David Gordon Green shouldn't have gone back to in the first place, as this is getting downer after Halloween, the original, all the way to Halloween Ends with the end of the trilogy. And now this, he should keep his hands out of classic horror movies, as I don't like the characters, as they come off rather terrible, and the shots in this movie look dreadful. The movie is not scary at all, except for maybe a scene with a snake at the beginning of the movie, and the acting as well as the score wasn't noticeable, and that tells me how bad this movie is. And hell, even the cameo by Linda Blair didn't save the movie for me either. While they took a dump on the original movie by pushing Ellen Burstyn while getting stabbed in the eyeballs with a cross, which is a bullshit thing a sequel can do. If this is the best director David Gordon Green can do for horror, I don't want any part of it, as he took a shit all over the original movie by making this fucking movie exist, as this pissed me off right off the bat. Like the bullshit ending, and I know it'll lead to a sequel that Tony and Miranda will hate on Victor and Angela, and I don't want to see that at all, as this is a non-recommendation for this movie, as other than the first movie, which was the great movie, the only great movie I'll say, I was very disappointed in this series, as it was one bad movie after another, and at the end of the day, it breaks my heart. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this Exorcist series, and until then, I'm the devil. Now kindly unhook these chains.